Welcome back to the deep dive. So, you're looking to get a little deeper into supporting challenging children in school, huh? Well, buckle up. This deep dive might just change the way you think about the whole thing.
Ooh, exciting. I love those.
We're diving into learning from behavior, how to understand and help challenging children in school.
Oh, by James E. Levine.
That's the one. And let me tell you, this is not your grandma's behavior management book.
Really? How so?
It goes way beyond just like, tips and tricks. Levine actually argues that instead of seeing behavior as like a problem to fix, we should see it as, wait for it, a way to understand what the child is trying to tell us.
Whoa, that's a big shift. How does he suggest we do that?
He actually suggests something so simple but so powerful, asking the child directly.
Asking them what?
What does this behavior mean to you? Just that one question can totally change the dynamic.
It gives the child a voice.
Yeah.
Like in therapy, you know?
Yeah.
The client's perspective is central.
Exactly. And Levine doesn't just like throw out theories. He backs it up with real stories. There's this one about a 9-year-old named Tim.
Okay, what about Tim?
He was having these crazy out-of-the-blue rages. And guess what?
What happened?
The typical behavior interventions, they actually made things worse.
Yikes. That's the opposite of what you want. What was going on?
It turns out Tim was dealing with PTSD. He had witnessed some pretty serious domestic violence at home.
Oh, wow. So his behavior wasn't defiance. It was like a cry for help.
Exactly. And that's where Levine's biopsychosocial perspective comes in, which is basically just a fancy way of saying that we need to look at the whole child.
The whole child.
Yeah, like their biology, their psychology, and their social context, all of it.
It's like trying to solve a puzzle, but only looking at one piece.
You got it. You need the whole picture to understand how it all fits together.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So we're looking at the whole picture, and what's the one thing Levine says is absolutely key?
Relationships. Strong relationships with adults, he says, are crucial for a child to, be successful emotionally and behaviorally.
I mean, that makes sense. We all need connection.
Right. And there's actually brain research that shows just how important those connections are for a kid's development.
Okay, so relationships matter, but what's the catch? I feel like there's always a catch.
Well, Levine points out that schools often focus on what the child needs to do differently.
Right. Change your behavior.
Exactly. But they don't always look at what the adults could be doing to improve the relationship.
It's like looking at only half the equation.
Exactly. And he gets that adults aren't perfect. We can't always be perfectly attuned to every child's needs.
Yeah, that would be a lot.
But the effort to stay connected, especially with those kids who are really struggling, is so important.
So it's not about being perfect. It's about showing up consistently and genuinely trying to connect.
Yeah, that's it. Showing up, being there, and making the effort.
Okay, I'm liking this Levine guy already.
Yeah.
Now, can we talk about the elephant in the room?
Oh, you mean mental health?
That's the one.
Well, Levine has a whole chapter dedicated to the link between behavior and mental health.
A whole chapter. What's the takeaway?
He basically argues that a lot of those behavioral issues we see in schools, well, they actually come from mental health challenges, like underlying stuff that's not always obvious.
It's like the behavior is just the tip of the iceberg.
Exactly. And he dives into specific diagnoses, which was super interesting to me.
Like what kinds of diagnoses?
Well, let's start with Asperger's syndrome.
Okay, what about Asperger's?
Levine points out that kids with Asperger's, they often have a really hard time understanding social cues, which can lead to a lot of frustration and outbursts.
That makes sense. If you're not picking up on the social cues, everything can feel really confusing and overwhelming.
Right. And so it's easy to mistake that for bad behavior when really it's a communication issue.
It's like they're speaking a different language.
Exactly. Then there's anxiety, which Levine says is actually the most common psychiatric condition in kids.
Really? More than ADHD.
That's what he says. But here's the thing. It often looks different in kids than it does in adults.
Ah, so it can be harder to spot.
Yep, exactly. And of course there's ADHD, which Levine has some pretty interesting thoughts about.
Oh, do tell.
Well, he actually challenges the way we typically think about it. He says it's more about a difficulty with self-regulation rather than just inattention.
So it's not just that they can't focus. It's that they have trouble controlling their impulses and their emotions.
That's the idea. And of course, we can't forget about trauma. Levine has a whole background in working with traumatized children.
Yeah, so I imagine he has a lot to say about that.
He really emphasizes how much trauma can impact a child's ability to, regulate their behavior.
Trauma changes everything. It changes the way the brain works.
Right. And so it makes you realize that before jumping to conclusions about a kid's behavior, we need to consider these potential underlying mental health
Yeah,
challenges.
absolutely. Don't just slap a label on it. Look deeper.
Yeah.
So is Levine all doom and gloom, or does he offer any solutions?
Oh, he definitely offers solutions. He actually provides a really specific model for creating behavior plans that are so much more than just a typical sticker chart.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
This is where things get really interesting. So tell me, what are some of these mind-blowing behavior plans that are more than just a sticker chart?
Oh, he doesn't just jump into plans. He outlines 10 principles for creating these effective plans first. And some of them truly revolutionary, I'd say.
10 principles, huh?
Uh,
That's a lot to unpack. Anything really stand out to you?
hmm, definitely. One that I think is super important is the focus on understanding over compliance.
Understanding over compliance. What does that even mean?
It means it's not about controlling the child, it's about helping them understand their own behavior, why they do the things they do.
Oh, I see. So instead of just saying, don't do that, you actually try to figure out what's driving that behavior.
Exactly. And another key principle, collaboration.
Collaboration. So, like working together with the child on the plan.
You got it. Levine believed they should be actively involved. It should feel like a partnership, not like something that's being imposed on them.
That makes so much sense. If you're involved in creating the plan, you're way more likely to buy into it, right?
Right. And remember that question we talked about earlier? What does this behavior mean to you? That ties right into this idea of collaboration.
Oh, yeah, totally. It gives them agency from the very beginning.
Exactly. It's like we're in this together.
I love that. Okay, what else? What other principles really stand out to you?
Well, he also stresses that the school needs to take ownership of the plan.
Oh, interesting. So it's not just on the parents or the child.
Nope, it's a shared responsibility. The school needs to be actively involved in creating the plan and making sure it works.
Okay, so we're talking about a total shift in mindset here.
Exactly. Moving away from like punishment and control and moving towards understanding, collaboration, and support.
It sounds really amazing. So now that we've got these high-level principles, does Levine give any practical strategies to actually put these ideas into action?
Oh, he does. He gives a ton of practical strategies, things you can use right away in the classroom or at home.
Okay, spill the tea. What are some of the strategies that you found most helpful?
Well, one that's surprisingly powerful is called naming the behavior.
Naming the behavior. What's that?
It's just about describing the behavior you see in a neutral way, you know,
Hmm.
not judgmental, just stating the facts.
Can you give me an example?
Sure. So, like, instead of saying, stop fidgeting, you could say, I see that your legs are moving and you're tapping your pencil.
Oh, so you're not criticizing or labeling them, you're just making an observation.
Right. It helps the child become aware of their own body and their behavior.
It's like you're giving them a language for what they're experiencing. I like that. What else?
Then there's this idea of cumulative anxiety, which I think is really important to understand.
Cumulative anxiety. Is that
Okay.
like anxiety that builds up over time?
Exactly. It means that meltdowns aren't always caused by just one thing that happens right before.
That makes sense. I know even I get overwhelmed when too many things pile up.
Right. And it's the same for kids. So instead of focusing just on the moment of the outburst, you have to look at what happened throughout the day, all the little things that might have contributed.
Oh, so it's like you're a detective trying to piece together the clues.
Exactly. Levine gives this example of a student named Todd who was having these really explosive episodes. And it turned out that being in a fully inclusive classroom was just too much for him.
Really? Too much in what way?
All the social demands, they were creating this constant buildup of anxiety that would lead to meltdowns.
So it wasn't that he was being intentionally disruptive, it's just that he couldn't handle all the stimulation.
Exactly. And once they recognized that pattern and made some changes, like giving him some breaks from the classroom, his behavior improved dramatically.
Wow. That's amazing how a small change can make such a big difference. What else? What else?
Well, another strategy that I like is to, reduce the emphasis on perfection.
Oh, yeah. Like not expecting kids to be perfect all the time.
Exactly. It's better to aim for good enough behavior.
Especially for kids who are already anxious or perfectionistic.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Setting those unrealistic expectations can set them up for failure. Focus on progress, not perfection.
Okay, I like that. It's like taking the pressure off a little bit. And what about teaching kids how to calm themselves down when they're feeling overwhelmed?
Oh, that's huge. Levine talks about teaching self-calming strategies.
What?
like, visual imagery or deep breathing exercises, things they can do to manage their own anxiety and stress.
Oh, that's a great idea. It's giving them tools to cope rather than just reacting. What about timeouts? Do those still have a place in Levine's model?
He's a little cautious about overusing them. He says they should only be used for kids who can already self-regulate and only after you've tried other strategies.
So it's not like a punishment, right?
Right, exactly. It's more about giving them a safe space to calm down. Sometimes a quiet space with a supportive adult is more helpful than, like, isolation.
That makes sense. It's about creating a sense of safety and support, not about punishment.
Right. Another strategy that I think is really powerful is offering replacement options.
Replacement options? Like, what do you mean by that?
So, say a child says something hurtful,
Yeah.
right? Instead of just punishing them, you can give them the chance to rephrase it, to say it differently.
Oh, so it's like you're giving them a chance to do it over, but in a more positive way.
Exactly. It gives them an opportunity to learn from their mistakes.
And to practice those positive social skills.
Yes, which is so important for their development.
That's true. What about visual cues? I know some kids respond really well to those.
Oh yeah, visual cues can be super helpful, especially for kids who have trouble processing auditory information.
So, like, instead of just telling them what to do, you show them.
Exactly. Think schedules, checklists, or even those visual timers.
It's like taking the pressure off of them to remember everything verbally.
Right. Visual supports can help create a sense of predictability and structure, which can be very calming. Now, when it comes to addressing a child's behavior, timing is everything.
Oh, yeah, timing is huge. So, like, when is the best time to talk to a child about their behavior?
Well, Levine says you want to wait until they've calmed down.
Well, that makes sense. Don't try to reason with them when they're still upset.
Right. They won't be receptive to it. Wait until they're more open to feedback. And when you do have that conversation, Levine suggests floating ideas about the meaning of the behavior.
Floating ideas. Okay, what do you mean by that?
So instead of saying, "Why did you hit him?"
Mm.
you could say something like, "I wonder if you hit him because you were feeling angry."
It's like you're giving them a possibility to consider without putting them on the spot.
Exactly. It opens up a dialogue.
Yeah.
And he also stresses the importance of avoiding punishments that involve taking things away,
Oh, that's interesting. Why is that?
especially for kids who are already struggling. Taking away things they enjoy, it just makes them feel worse. It reinforces those negative feelings.
So instead of taking things away, what should we do?
Focus on positive reinforcement. Give them opportunities to earn those privileges back.
Oh, that's a much more positive approach. Okay, what else? What else stood out to you?
Levine also talks about how important those regular check-in times are.
Check-in times, like just see how they're doing.
Exactly. It's about creating that sense of safety and predictability, knowing there's someone they can count on for support.
And who are these check-ins for?
For any kid who's dealing with difficult emotions, really, depression, anxiety, trauma, those check-in times can be really valuable. They can also be helpful for kids who struggle with organization and planning, like kids with ADHD.
Oh, so it's like having a built-in coach to help them stay on track.
Exactly. He also reminds us to consider a child's developmental stage when we're trying to understand their behavior.
Yeah, of course. A 5-year-old is going to behave differently than a teenager.
Right. We have to adjust our expectations and our responses based on their age and, their capabilities.
And we can't forget about all those environmental and cultural factors that play a role.
Exactly. We need to be sensitive to things like race, socioeconomic status, gender, and how those things might influence their experience.
So it's really about understanding the whole child within their context, not just seeing them as a problem to be solved.
You got it. Levine's approach is all about shifting that mindset from fixing the child to understanding and supporting them. And to show how this works in practice, he uses a lot of case studies in the book.
Oh, case studies. I love those. It makes it so much more real. Do any of them really stand out to you?
Well, there's one about Jason, a high school student with severe depression.
Oh, okay. What about him?
He initially resisted the whole behavior plan thing. He didn't want any help.
Teenagers.
Right. But eventually, with a good therapist and some support from the school, he really thrived.
That's awesome. So it's possible to reach even those kids who seem really resistant?
Exactly. You just have to be patient and persistent. Then there's the case of James, a fifth grader with a history of trauma.
Okay, what about him?
His case is interesting because his behavior plan actually backfired.
Wait, what? How did a behavior plan backfire?
Well, it turned out that his emotional needs weren't being met. The plan focused on managing his behavior, but it didn't address the underlying trauma he was carrying.
That's a good reminder that a behavior plan isn't a magic bullet, right?
Right. It can't fix everything. It can't address deeper issues like trauma or emotional needs that aren't being met.
It highlights how important that holistic approach is, looking at the whole child, not just the behavior.
Exactly. And Levine doesn't stop at just these individual strategies. He actually advocates for much broader changes in how schools approach challenging behavior altogether.
So he's not just trying to help individual kids, he's trying to transform the whole system.
That's exactly it. And
Yeah.
it's a pretty radical idea. One of the changes he proposes is a shift away from punishment and towards restitution.
Restitution, like making amends for your actions.
Exactly. It's about restorative justice.
Mm.
Instead of just punishing kids for doing something wrong, we focus on helping them repair the harm they've caused.
Oh, that makes so much sense. It's about teaching them to take responsibility. What else? What other changes does he suggest?
He also emphasizes this thing called the stages of change model.
Stages of change model. I've never heard of that.
It's basically the idea that change is a process, not a switch you can just flip on and off.
Oh, that's so true. It takes time and effort to change behavior, especially for kids.
Right, exactly. And he's a big advocate for social emotional learning. He says it needs to be a core part of the curriculum.
Yes. Teaching kids those essential social and emotional skills is so important.
He says it's like giving them the tools they need to navigate the world successfully. And finally, he calls for more research
More research into what?
into the effectiveness of these different behavioral interventions and the impact of relationships on a child's success.
So we need to be constantly evaluating and making sure our approaches are actually working, right?
Exactly. We can't just assume we're doing the right thing. We have to measure it and see what's making a difference.
That makes so much sense. Well, what do you think of his overall vision for the future of education?
Honestly, I think it's pretty inspiring. He envisions schools that are truly inclusive and supportive for all kids, no matter what their challenges are.
That's a beautiful vision.
It is, but achieving it is going to require a collective effort. It's not just up to teachers and counselors.
Right, takes a village, right?
Exactly. And this village needs to be built on mutual respect, open communication, and a shared commitment to the well-being of all children,
So it's about putting the child at the center of everything we do.
and making sure their needs are being met, recognizing that behavior is communication, and we have to listen and try to understand what they're trying to tell us.
Because sometimes what they're telling us is that we need to change.
That's right. We need to change our expectations, our approaches, and maybe even our whole systems.
And that's a pretty powerful message, right?
It is. It's a message that challenges us to do better, to be better, for the sake of all children.
So as we think about all this, as we reflect on everything we've discussed today, what's the one question you want our listeners to really sit with?
Good question. What if, instead of trying to change the child, we focused on changing the system around them?
That's a really big question, isn't it? I mean, it's a little overwhelming to think about changing the whole system, but also kind of exciting.
Right. What if we really could create schools that actually work for every kid? Schools that are truly trauma-informed.
Trauma-informed. Okay, so that means the adults understand how trauma impacts kids.
Yeah, exactly. And they create environments that actually feel safe for kids who have experienced trauma.
So predictable, consistent, that kind of thing.
Right. And not just trauma-informed, but neurodiversity affirming, too.
Okay, so remind me, what does neurodiversity affirming mean again?
It means celebrating the unique strengths and challenges of all learners. Recognizing that there's no one right way to learn or behave.
Oh, yeah, right. So instead of trying to fit everyone into the same box, we embrace those differences and support each kid in the way they need.
Exactly. And what about prioritizing restorative justice?
Okay, restorative justice. Instead of focusing on punishment, you mean?
Yeah. We focus on repairing harm and building relationships.
So teaching kids how to resolve conflicts peacefully, take responsibility, make amends when they've hurt someone.
Exactly. It's about creating a community of respect and accountability.
And moving away from that blame and shame thing that can be so toxic.
Right. And imagine if social emotional learning wasn't just like an extra thing.
Right. Like an add-on they squeeze into the schedule if there's time.
What if it was woven into the whole school day?
So we would teach kids how to manage their emotions, build healthy relationships, make good decisions, be resilient when things get tough.
All of that. And those skills would be just as important as reading, writing, and math.
Because honestly, if a kid is struggling emotionally or socially, they're not going to be able to learn effectively, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's the foundation for everything else. And you know what else I think is really powerful? What if we just, like, started by believing in kids?
Believing in them.
Yeah, like truly believing in their potential, no matter what their background is, what challenges they face, or mistakes they've made.
Oh, that's powerful. Just having that unwavering faith in them.
It can change everything. It creates hope. It empowers them to rise to the occasion.
It reminds me of that quote, children may forget what you said, but they'll never forget how you made them feel.
Oh, that's so good.
If we make them feel seen and valued and loved, they can do anything.
And that's really the heart of what Levine is saying, right? It's about shifting from fixing kids to supporting them, from controlling them to empowering them, from judging them to understanding them.
And ultimately, recognizing that every child deserves the chance to thrive.
And it's our responsibility to make that possible, to create the conditions where that can happen.
It's a challenge for sure.
It is. It's going to require us to, like, step outside of our comfort zones, to question our assumptions,
Yeah.
to be willing to change.
But if we can do that, if we can create schools that are truly trauma-informed, neurodiversity affirming, culturally responsive, and focused on restorative justice,
We can change kids' lives.
and in the end, create a more just and compassionate world for all of us.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Well, that was quite a deep dive into James Levine's work.
I don't know about you, but I'm feeling pretty inspired. And maybe a little challenged.
Challenged in a good way, I hope.
Definitely.
Right.
So to our listeners, as you go back out into the world, as you go back to your classrooms, your homes, your communities, we want to leave you with one last question.
Well, I love this. What is it?
What one small step can you take today in your own little corner of the world to move us closer to that vision, to create a world where every child can thrive? Keep learning, keep questioning, and keep believing in the power of change. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.
Thanks for watching. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends. Your support helps us keep creating valuable content like this. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss an update. Join our community for more insights